This week, figures were released showing men are killing themselves at higher rates than ever before. The ABS stats comparing rates from the end of 2019, pre-coronavirus, to a decade ago show a slow but steady increase in the proportion of men tragically ending their lives. They are now almost 4 times more likely than women. 4. Now, suicide is hugely complex, and we're getting better at demedicalising it. Unlike women, most men who die by their own hands don't have a history of mental illness or past attempts. There's a stronger link with job loss, child custody battles, or alcohol and gambling. But what we're not doing is recognising that suicide is mostly a male problem and targeting funding, messaging and policy accordingly. There's recognition when we talk about issues like domestic violence that women are predominantly the victims. The same doesn't happen with suicide. Now, how much of this is because we just can't see males as victims? There's the age-old stereotype of women having problems and men being problems. The feminist answer, parroted by many men, is that blokes just need to be more like women, more vulnerable, seeking help through traditional outlets like counselling. This view also seeps into our institutions. Is this really the answer? Now, granted, traditional masculinity has taken a great hit with social and economic changes. Work with the hands is not as common. Men are no longer naturally seen as providers and protectors. I think I've only been in like one fight in my entire life in primary school. But if the Morrison government wants to make progress in their goal of 0 suicides, they need to target their funding to male-specific initiatives. There should be an onus on organisations to target blokes better, go to where they are, and also do a better job at recruiting men into caregiving roles. Mateship and peer support, for example, have deep roots in the Australian psyche. Male-only spaces are important. We must resist the cultural pressure to feminise. There aren't easy answers or silver bullets, but this week's suicide figures scream for a greater, more specific focus on men. Now, Sarah, you know, you're certainly an important speaker in the gender debates in particular. What's your take?
Oh, Tanveer, I think it's such an important issue and I really applaud you for raising it. We've actually discussed this on this program earlier this year. We have talked about really that it was a tragedy. It's actually a national tragedy. We are rightfully increasingly talking a lot about mental health. We've seen the terrifying figures that have come out with COVID. Once we get through the immediate public health crisis and then the economic crisis, arguably the biggest catastrophe at all facing us collectively is going to be the mental health battle. And as you say, 4 times the rate of suicides are men. I mean, that is just a terrifying figure. I don't know anyone that isn't horrified by that. We need to break down the silence. As you say, there's no silver bullets, there's no easy answer. I would like to query, though, why you say that feminists have got it wrong. I mean, I am a feminist, and when I say that, simply means that I believe in equality, and that goes both ways, because I think that we should be taking the pressure off men to feel that they are the sole providers, that they have to carry the burden to be leaders alone, that women should be sharing that load with them. I also think that breaking down stereotypes is about saying that women can be strong and that men can be vulnerable. I don't think that it's seen as feminising the issue to encourage men to speak out and talk about it and know that it's okay to cry and be weak. And I mean, obviously, when we know that part of the reason that men, as you talked about there, tend to not make multiple attempts, unfortunately, is obviously because sometimes the methods are a little more direct. But I think it's also because they don't seek that help. And maybe they're not talking socially and someone is saying, to use the parlance, are you okay? So I actually think that, to use your lingo, that I think we need to feminise it. I think that men have a lot to gain if they feel that they can break down the gender barriers and be a bit more like women.
Do you think our culture does find it hard to see men as victims?
Well, I do. I think that men sometimes find it hard to see themselves as victims, and I think that's because of societal norms. It's that classic thing, isn't it? You know, boys don't cry and all that sort of nonsense that we feed our good men from the time that they're children, and then when they are confronted with difficult times and, you know, all sorts of stresses in later life, we wonder why they're, you know, oh, why didn't I know? Because they've been taught to be stoic. So I think, yes, that I don't see it as being a victim. Like I say, I think, you know, public health, everyone is suffering. The depression is so widespread and the suicide figures don't lie. So we shouldn't feel that we're a victim. We should feel that we're human and that we're struggling. And that is part of being a human being on this planet, male or female. And if women, whatever it is that women, if they feel they can seek out help without being judged, I just want that for men. I mean, apart from anything else, I'm the mum of 2 young boys and I take it really seriously.
Hey, Sarah, you do this to me every single week. You get me agreeing with something that you say and then you stop it all. Because we're all feminists now, right? We all believe in equality. So that's a unity ticket, you and me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cora, you are a famous feminist.
Well, this is news to the world today, right? But by your criteria, this is where we're at. But where I disagree with you, you can't try to feminise the male spirit. Men and women are different. They are different biologically and they have different hormones that course through their veins or through their blood. They respond differently to different stimuli. And some of that, of course, is cultural, right? But what are we going to do? We're going to say, no, we don't want our blokes to be sticking up and protecting people who are vulnerable or potentially more vulnerable. Do we want to abandon chivalry and some of the time-honoured codes of behaviour? We've got to find a way of making sure that men can engage in the areas and in the manner that men traditionally have and make that all right. And some people like going to have a few beers at the pub and talking, having a chat about some of the problems, and it only comes out after a couple of beers. I know in my local community there's a men's shed and there's a lot of blokes that like to go there. I've been to some veterans sheds where it's exclusively about veterans helping other vets to do something productive. Now, these are blokey things. Typically blokey things, and I celebrate the difference. But I think the push to blur the gender lines or to take away some of the traditional responsibilities of both men and women, some of the cultural norms, I think is putting enormous amounts of pressure on some blokes. They're always cast as somehow bad, superior, the patriarchy, their skin colour or whatever it might be. And we've got to start getting back to what it means to be human rather than trying to pigeonhole people into various aggressor groups. What do you think about that, Catherine?
Well, Corey, I'm with you. You know, you and I have discussed this. You know, my anomalous position in this, in that I have never claimed to be a woman. I spent 56 years functioning as a male, and I consider myself a transsexual. I don't regard that as a dirty word, although the queer community do. And I think you're right. I think I had the great privilege of sitting on a panel with Jordan Peterson on Q&A. And what was very clear from the volume of correspondence I got from followers of Jordan Peterson, a lot of them were fatherless young blokes. And they were looking to someone who set standards for them. And there is a crisis in masculinity in the West especially, where you've got... you've had the deindustrialisation of the West as jobs have gone to the developing world, so that meaningful employment for many lads who didn't get a chance to go on to tertiary education, their dignity, their ability to be breadwinners has been removed from them. And this debate, the thing that gets my hackles going is this constant sort of chatter from a handful of women who, you know, the 8 or 10 women who keep constantly getting appointed to every board in Australia, talking about toxic masculinity. You know, that's static. If I was a parent of sons, as Sarah is, I'd be absolutely furious about that, because this sort of sense that men being masculine in any way is sort of somehow toxic now, that there's this. And I can tell you, in the developing world, where people are still doing traditional roles, that kind of lingo is an indulgence they just can't afford. And as someone who has been a soldier and is proud of our army, heaven forbid the day when we aren't relying on hard young men and I use the term advisedly, to kick in doors and do the dirty work on our behalf, because it is innately male, it is innately a warrior ethos, and we stigmatise that at our peril, in my view.
Yeah, I actually agree, Catherine. If I can just say, sorry, Corey, to cut you off, I'll just very quickly say, actually, Catherine, I have called out toxic masculinity many times, and I completely agree. I don't think that it does men any favours. I just don't think, as a feminist that wants the best for men, that that toxic masculinity is part of the conversation, not for me.
Yeah. It's a lazy slur.
Well, this is a deeply emotional issue for many people, and so there is a cautionary message that if you are feeling distressed at home, you can call Lifeline on 131114 or visit lifeline.org.au to get some help.